I'm Gene Coletta, editor of the Latin America Advisor at the Inter-American Dialogue in Washington. Among the stories we've been covering lately is Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, who has been under fire lately, not only for his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic in Brazil, but more recently over his firing of the head of the federal police in Brazil and allegations from his former justice minister, Sergio Moro, that Bolsonaro tried to interfere in the police force's investigations. Helping us today to sort out these topics is Gabrielle Trebat. She's from McLarty Associates, where she's managing director for Brazil and the Southern Cone. Thanks so much, Gabrielle, for joining us today on this important topic.
Thank you, Gene. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. Now, as we're talking about Jair Bolsonaro and some of the challenges he faces, could you tell me a little bit about how serious you see these allegations against Bolsonaro, the ones that Sergio Moro raised as he was leaving office?
Thank you, Gene. Well, I think the situation is quite serious for the president, given where the allegations are coming from, and that is from his very, very popular former Justice Minister, Sergio Moro, who, as we know, very famously led the Operation Car Wash investigation that really targeted the Labor Party in Brazil, but really politicians across all political parties, and led to, of course, most famously the imprisonment of former President Lula. So Sergio Moro, accepted the position to join Bolsonaro's team at the beginning of his mandate as Justice Minister on a mandate of anti-corruption, and he's got a lot of popular support. Sergio Moro does, and so I think anything that he says is taken quite seriously, and it really was a big political blow to President Bolsonaro when he came out with a quite bombastic press conference and unexpected resignation a couple weeks ago in Brasilia. It's tough to say how serious the allegations really are. Of course, he's a very credible and trusted figure, Sergio Moro, but frankly, as a public, we don't exactly know what the police, we know what they're investigating, but we don't exactly know what kind of evidence they have against the president. There's rumors, and there's been a few leaks, but frankly, until I think further evidence is uncovered, we won't really know if the president really, is in a situation that could prove to be untenable. Again, some of those investigations that we know that are ongoing involve his family, involve possible involvement in fake news, organized schemes. There's investigations into the assassination of former Rio City Councilman Marielle Franco and possible ties with Bolsonaro family to militia groups in Rio that were behind her assassination. So these are very serious investigations. They're ongoing. We do know that Sergio Moro's allegation of obstruction of justice was serious enough to warrant a Supreme Court investigation into the president. We do know that this week some of his ministers, members of Congress, are testifying as part of that investigation. We know, of course, that the federal police is also continuing to hold their own investigations. So I think until further evidence is either leaked or revealed, it'll be difficult to gauge how serious it is, but certainly it's a very worrisome situation for the presidency.
As you mentioned, there are some important testimonies that are happening this week in Brazil. How fast could all of this happen in Brazil? And is Bolsonaro looking at a very quick potential impeachment?
There's no timeline for these investigations. The Supreme Court can take as little as long as it would like, as we saw from investigations into former President Rousseff for her impeachment. And of course, the federal police investigation as well are open-ended. So the nature of these investigations are such that it's difficult to say if there's any kind of set timeline. As to his impeachment, I think right now, it's difficult to say. I think that there is not a case right now from what we can see for an impeachment. A number of factors need to be put in place to make something of that significant of a nature more likely, and I just don't see it. He enjoys strong popular support. He's got a very loyal base of about a good 30%. As we see historically from when former President Rousseff and former President Collor were impeached, he would need to lose popular support more, sort of in single digits, at most, 10% or so. That would need to happen. That has not taken place yet. He must also lose support of Congress, and he continues to, I'm not going to say he enjoys robust support, but Congress is very fragmented in Brasilia. I don't think there's much appetite either among the public or among Congress for a second consecutive impeachment of a president, certainly not now. And frankly, President Bolsonaro, I think, is trying to double down a little bit on his outreach to Congress to make sure he is able to ward off any kind of impeachment inquiry. So he's reaching out to the centrist parties known as the Centrão in Brazil. And there's even sort of rumors of perhaps having to resort to old school pork barrel politics that he swore he wouldn't do when he was elected, and perhaps in exchange for some support, which is always the way politics has been done in Brasilia, by the way. He may have to give some cabinet appointments or some political appointments in his government. So that's all, I think, as I understand our discussion, under consideration. But for now, I think, you know, he still has that congressional support, or at least that interested dialogue. The last factor, I think, that would precipitate an impeachment is any kind of sense that he has lost his credibility on economic management. That has not happened yet. You know, despite, I think, some tensions between the economic team and President Bolsonaro over fiscal spending, the economic team is very much in place. And most recently this week, when after a little bit of flip-flopping, President Bolsonaro did side with Economy Minister Guedes on freezing civil servant salaries as part of a wartime spending negotiation. So I think his credibility in economic management, as long as Paulo Guedes is there, is still quite strong. So those are, I would say, a couple of the factors that I think would be a harbinger for impeachment, but I don't see clearly yet that he has lost support on any of the counts.
Mm-hmm. And so right at the moment, he doesn't seem to have lost so much support, as you say, that he is in real danger right at this moment. But what are some of the factors that could change that and could make him more in danger of impeachment economically or politically in Brazil?
I would say three factors. I would say one, the pandemic, first and foremost. Brazil, I think, has the third highest number of new cases worldwide. We've got over 160,000 right now. They've tragically passed the 10,000 figure mark in terms of deaths from COVID-related deaths over this past weekend. Frankly, as with the United States and other countries, I think there's a lot of underreporting. There's insufficient testing. We know Brazil is testing at a rate between 20 and maybe even 30 times less was being tested in the United States. Because they've been a few weeks behind us as well in the pandemic. So I think the course, the extent, how severe the health crisis is an important factor to watch. That's one. Two, the investigations that I referenced. I think if more evidence is uncovered or leaks happen that directly tie President Bolsonaro to either, as Minister Moro alleges, obstructing justice or somehow having direct knowledge of involvement in any kind of criminal or any kind of corruption cases. If that's proven undeniably, I think that could be a factor to watch too. And three, I think the economy. You know, I think there's an acknowledgement that this year is, we're going to see a contraction, I mean, across the world. In Brazil, we're looking about 5%. I think unemployment could reach double digits. You know, he was elected on a platform of reform and of an economic reform. So I think there's generally an acknowledgement that that reform agenda will have to be put on pause this year to create space and to create, frankly, the resources to address and battle the pandemic. But I think once we're post-pandemic, if we see that reform agenda is not bouncing back, I think that could also undermine the president's support among the business community, which was an important demographic in voting him into office on the promises that they want to undertake some of the tax reforms, to some of the other measures to restore, to address structural reform issues in Brazil. And if there's a sense, once we're post-pandemic, maybe in 2021, and the economy starts to recover, there's a feeling that perhaps interest in continuing to pursue that agenda is lost. I think that'll be another signal to watch.
All right, and now you mentioned a couple of the other presidents of Brazil who have been impeached in recent years. Does it seem like there's sort of fatigue in Brazil from impeachment, since it was not even 4 years ago that Dilma Rousseff was impeached and thrown?
I think there is. I think there's a lot of fatigue, and I think nobody, I would say even the opposition to President Bolsonaro would want to compound a health crisis with a political crisis. We are unfortunately dealing with a lot of political tension in Brazil right now, but impeachment is a whole nother level that I really think there's a strong reluctance to pursue at this moment. And I think rightly so, the attention is focused on people's health, on people's lives, on making sure equipment is able to be brought into the country. I think, the government is working very well and very uniformly to lower tariffs on PPEs, on importations of ventilators and everything they need to address the pandemic. I think you're seeing a lot of really good cooperation between the private sector and the public sector in Brazil right now to ensure hospital beds, to ensure access to needed health care. So I think you're seeing a real, despite I think some of the president's rhetoric and criticism of some of the lockdowns, I think the governors have banded well together, and people's main focus right now is getting through the health crisis. So yes, I think there's a lot of fatigue. I think, frankly, there would probably be some fatigue for impeachment, even irrespective of the health crisis, given that, we're barely 3 years out of the last one. But because of the health crisis, I really think there isn't much appetite. But that could change. We've seen in Brasilia, politics can change very quickly. And if there's a feeling, I think on any of these other, factors that I mentioned, if he loses credibility of economic management, if he loses popular support, and if Congress turns against him, we could be looking at a very different situation for him. But I do believe that it's going to be probably 2021 before we see whether those conflicts of factors are going to be relevant enough to precipitate an impeachment. But we're still quite a ways off from that point. I'm sitting here right now talking to you.
Exactly. And as you say, they can always change. And I'm sure we'll be talking more, and our readers will be seeing your commentaries in the Advisor also on this very important subject in Brazil.
Anytime.
Absolutely.
It's a pleasure.
Terrific. Gabrielle Trebat of McLarty Associates, the Managing Director for Brazil and the Southern Cone there at McLarty. I'm Gene Coletta, editor of the Latin America Advisor at the Inter-American Dialogue in Washington.